Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Freethinking podcast and Freethinking podcast video. This is a new thing for us. Well, not really that new. We've done it before on video, but this is going to be a new thing that we're going to be doing. So you're welcome. You now get to see my face and Tim's face while you listen to us rant and rave about certain philosophical topics. So be sure to check out on the YouTube. And I just said the YouTube like a boomer, but check us out on our YouTube channel. And also, if you still want to do the audio podcast, it will remain up on our same feed. So you're good to go. If you're hearing this as audio only and you're like, wait, what's going on? And you don't care, just keep doing what you're doing and nothing's going to change. But all that aside, welcome, Tim. How's it going?
Hey, Scott, I'm doing good. Yeah, I like what we're doing here. We're going to, try to kill two birds with one stone, do some audio, do some video of some, for people. I love listening to podcasts, especially when I'm driving around. Nothing better than listening to podcasts while you're running, either driving around or running on the treadmill or doing errands or whatever. But hey, if you want to sit down and watch something on YouTube, we got something for you also. So there you go. That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Unfortunately, this means I have to pay attention for all of the times that you talk rather than, start ignoring you.
Right.
But
I know
that's a joke. That was a joke. Anyway, so Tim, why don't you go ahead and introduce kind of what we're going to be talking about for the foreseeable future, we'll just say, because I'm not sure how long it'll be.
Yeah, I'm sure this is going to be multiple episodes, but yeah, today, what we're recording right now, we're going to be interacting with two free will scholars who have an awesome podcast of their own. Now, I've got to tell you, although Dr. Craig's Reasonable Faith podcast has utterly changed my life, I'd say it's my favorite podcast of all time.
Whoa.
Well, yeah, I mean, just because it's changed my life. I mean, we're close, but I'll give it to Dr. Craig just by a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, it's my favorite. But I'll tell you this, the podcast that I now listen to more than any other podcast is something called The Free Will Show, hosted by two philosophers of freedom, Taylor Sear and Matt Flummer. Now, I believe that Taylor is a compatibilist or a semi-compatibilist, and that Matt leans toward libertarian freedom. I'm not entirely sure about that. I could be wrong, but they try to stay neutral on their show, unlike me. They try to stay neutral and merely expose their audience to different philosophers in the field of freedom. And they've done a fantastic job. But I've got to tell you, my favorite episode to date is the last one they've done. That's episode 20, where Taylor and Matt, they're not interviewing somebody else, but they engage in a Q&A format with some of their listeners. So when I listened to this episode, I found myself repeatedly jumping in and adding my own thoughts. So with that in mind, I thought it might be good for the two of us to record a series of podcasts discussing this particular episode of the Free Will Show, so that you and I, Scott, that we can both join their conversation. So let me make a quick note. It was probably a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, when I first heard of Taylor Sear. I'd never heard of him or Matt before that. Our Reasonable Faith colleague, Stillman Smith, sent me a video of Taylor where he was discussing some issues regarding libertarian freedom. So Stillman actually had me on his YouTube show to interact with Taylor's words. Taylor wasn't there, so it was just Stillman and I talking. And by the way, people need to subscribe to Stillman Smith's YouTube channel. He's doing some fantastic work. But anyway, that was the first time that I'd ever heard of Taylor Sear. But now Taylor has become somewhat of a guy that I really look up to. I don't agree with everything that he thinks, but I've found myself agreeing with much of what he's saying. And I think he's just a fantastic philosopher, and so is his co-host Matt. Now, Taylor and I recently became Facebook friends, and we follow each other on Twitter. By the way, my handle is TSXPRESS, so TS Express. I'm not fond of that Twitter handle, but that's what I came up with. Like when Twitter first came out, thought it was cool then. Don't think it's cool now. But
And
there
Tim
you go.
Stratton is taken.
I believe it is. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. There's an NFL football player, or a former football player, named Tim Stratton. So I think he might have taken. I don't know. But anyway, when I first became Facebook friends with Taylor, I told him that I was loving his podcast, and he told me that he'd recently become aware of my work because he saw me interviewed on Jordan Hampton's YouTube channel, which, by the way, is another fantastic channel that people need to subscribe to. Anyway, all of that to say, I love the Free Will Show, and I encourage everyone to listen to it, subscribe to their stuff, learn from these guys. What I love about them is they're always asking their guests, these philosophers of freedom, what they mean by freedom and things like responsibility and determinism and things like that. So anyway, I'm looking forward to unpacking these things with you, Scott, on the Freethinking podcast. Now, last thing, just want to talk about our podcast, Scott, and these YouTube videos. Now, I think you and I have a pretty cool thing going on here. And I think we're recently starting to, come into our own a little bit. And we've developed a nice conversation between a theologian and a philosopher. Who else is doing that right now? I can't think of any theologian and philosopher who are having a conversation on a regular basis.
Dr. Craig's internal dialogue.
Yeah, Dr. Craig's internal dialogue. That's a good one. Yeah, so I guess I should be clear. I'm a theologian, and you are a philosophy grad student who is well on his way to becoming a PhD philosopher. But between the two of us, let's see what we can do here today as we interact with these two impressive philosophers of freedom. What do you think?
I think that sounds great. I appreciate your words. Also, I will say about the how we've kind of started to come into our own. Whenever people ask me about the podcast, I'm like, well, here it is. The first, 50, 60 or so aren't, but then from then on, I feel like pretty good about everything we're doing. I'm proud of the whole show, but it certainly took a little bit of time for us to find what our particular voice was going to be. So
yeah, we kind of evolved a bit. And from everything from our early podcasts and even my early blog articles, sometimes I go back and I read those and I'm like, oh man.
Yeah.
So yeah, sometimes I think I should go back and start making a lot of edits to my early blog work.
Yeah.
But I'm feeling really good about where we're at right now. So,
but here's the thing, and not to get too sidetracked, but part of having this kind of platform is people get to see you think out loud and see your thinking change over time. I don't know. I doubt hardly any philosopher looks back on or theologian looks back on their early work and is like, yep, all of that is still 100% how I'd say it right now.
Right.
Even if they agree largely with their conclusions, which I think you still do. There are certainly things you've learned, nuances you wish you would have been aware of that would have been helpful at the time. But you know what? Nobody starts out knowing exactly how they want things to sound or things to say. And that's part of the process of learning. And that's what we're trying to do here.
Yeah. So with that in mind, when people are going after my work, like if they don't like my conclusions and they want to try to debunk it, if they're going after the stuff I wrote 2 years ago or more, I tell them, well, look, you need to be going after the updated stuff. That's a little more precise maybe. So
yeah.
Anyway, let's see what we can do today.
Yeah. So let's talk about this episode 20 of the Free Will Show, because we're going to just kind of get into it. So Taylor and Matt, they begin by discussing like the semantics and terminology of free will. And they start with this question, what are contra causal powers? And Taylor says, it seems like the kind of powers we would need to have if we have libertarian free will would be something outside of the causal order of the universe. Matt says, there's like the normal natural cause and effect relationships in the natural world with the natural laws. I keep saying this word natural, so that the contra causal powers somehow are able to go against those natural laws. The natural laws in the past would determine some effect, and then free will breaks into that cause effect relationship. And Taylor says it's almost like it requires something supernatural. I guess, given the types of libertarian views we've talked about in season 2 here, it didn't seem like any of the views required anything like supernatural powers for free will. And Matt says, surprisingly enough, nobody mentioned anything supernatural.
Yeah, actually, if memory serves, Christopher Evan Franklin, who was a guest on their show, did make a comment that some have thought that libertarian freedom entailed, I think he said, godlike abilities, which would definitely then fall under the category of the supernatural. Now, I'm not saying that that's necessarily Franklin's view, but he did make a related comment about, I believe, Robert or
Roderick?
Chisholm. Roderick Chisholm. Yeah. So maybe we can find that timestamp and put it in the show notes or the description here. But yeah, he mentioned something about godlike abilities, which would be supernatural powers. Now, I don't think that the reason we are not always bound to the laws of physics and chemistry, quantum events, or anything else when we think, deliberate, judge, and evaluate is because there's something supernatural about humanity. Indeed, we are created in the image and likeness of God, and I discuss this and conclude this in my book. So I don't presuppose such things. Now, one is free to presuppose, but why presuppose when you can logically conclude? But anyway, strictly speaking, there is no logical contradiction with the statement a purely physical being or a wet robot has libertarian freedom, right? If I say a purely physical being has libertarian freedom, or a wet robot has libertarian freedom, or even a dry robot has libertarian freedom, right? There's nothing, there's no logical contradiction in a strict sense there. However, it does seem to me to be metaphysically impossible in a logically broad sense once all the facts about wet robots and the laws and events of nature are known. A Christian can easily make a biblical case that there is more to humanity than just the physical. But anyway, what do you think, Scott?
Well, this reminds me of the conversation you and I and Tyson James were having when we had dinner the other day. But I would mention I was talking to some friends just about free will, and as you do at a dinner party,
That's right.
and they were a little bit confused about, okay, how could God create everything about us, but still like that not be sufficient to determine our actions? And I kind of just was like, I don't know exactly how that works, but it doesn't seem to me to be logically impossible. And if that's the case, then God is certainly able to do it. Incredulity is not a sufficient response in that particular instance to say, well, it just doesn't. I don't get it. Well, it's like, well, that doesn't necessarily mean it's not possible. And so, I made the remark. I was like, every free choice we make is almost a miraculous occurrence. Like every time we make a decision, something is kind of, for lack of a better term, coming into being out of nothing within us.
That's right.
So it's like sort of miraculous in that sense. But again, that doesn't seem impossible for God to create creatures who can do that.
That's right. That reminds me of a conversation I had with J.P. Moreland not too long ago, and he would seem to agree with you. Now, of course, you are in the philosophy program at Biola, in which he's a professor. So, but in fact, he used the term when we were talking. He used the term many miracles. Like when a human makes a libertarian free choice, or when we freely choose to think, or when we freely choose to act in a libertarian manner, when we are not causally determined by something or someone else, he calls that a mini miracle. And that really struck me and stuck with me. So I think you're onto something there.
Well, I'll tell you what, JP Moreland is good company to hold. Okay, so let's move on to the next little timestamp that we have, where one of the questions that they begin to respond to goes like this. So the questioner says, I'm beginning to think that much of this debate, the problem of free will, is semantics. It seems that the common understanding of free will is shared by everyone, but philosophers just use different labels and terms. The average person believes they are able to make free choices. They understand that if choices are forced, then they're not free. And Taylor answers it like this. He says, it's tricky because even just among philosophers who work on free will, people have different views about how we should think of the semantics. So someone like Peter Van Inwagen thinks that free will is a term of art, and that you can, as a philosopher, stipulate what you mean by it, whereas others use the term free will and define it by its role in connection to moral responsibility.
Yeah, those are great points. And I guess I have two more points to add. First, I think Peter Van Inwagen is exactly right. That a philosopher, or a theologian in my case, is free to define what he means by freedom. And, I've gone to great lengths to explain what I mean by freedom and why any view affirming exhaustive causal determinism is problematic. So that's the first point. The second is I think it's a drastic mistake to limit the scope of the discussion of free will only to moral responsibility. I believe moral responsibility is a secondary issue. So make no mistake, I do believe that libertarian freedom is required for moral responsibility. And I explain why this is the case in my book. But yeah, if you don't want to take my word for it, consider the words of the leading philosopher of all things related to the moral argument, Dr. David Baggett. Dr. Baggett was recently a guest right here on our Freethinking Ministries YouTube show, and he agreed with me. Contra, the Calvinistic philosopher Guillaume Bignon, who disagreed with me in his writings. But Dr. Baggett then said, no, I was right. He affirmed that libertarian freedom is assumed by those who advance the moral argument for God's existence, which I think most Calvinists like doing, offering the moral argument. So he's saying, look, when you do that, you're affirming, at least tacitly, you're assuming libertarian freedom. Be that as it may, as I have repeatedly made clear, libertarian freedom is necessary for certain kinds of rationality and certain kinds of knowledge. I'm not saying all kinds of rationality and knowledge, but some important kinds of rationality and knowledge. I like to say the kinds of rationality and knowledge worth wanting. And, this topic is raised later in this episode by Taylor and Matt. So I'm sure we're going to get to that and discuss that in more detail soon.
Yeah. I was thinking about this. I'm sure this has been written about before, just because pretty much everything interesting in philosophy has been written about in some way before.
Yeah, right. We stand on the shoulders of giants, right?
Exactly. But I would really be interested in hearing from philosophers on all sides of the issue what they think are the necessary conditions for responsibility of any kind. Because it seems that moral and rational responsibility would share at least some of the same necessary conditions, right? Like one of those, or one of those to me is intuitively free will of some kind. And so I'd be interested to see what the I don't know what you want to call it. There's a word for it that I just am blanking on, but like what's shared between the two?
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess for me, I just want to make it clear. I just want to reiterate that what I am primarily concerned with is dessert responsibility, not dessert that you eat after a meal, but dessert responsibility, which I'm talking about the deservings of being praiseworthy or blameworthy for a certain thought or a certain belief or even a certain action. So I'm primarily concerned with dessert responsibility and the ability, and more importantly than the opportunity at times, to infer the best explanation over false beliefs and then irrationally affirm claims of knowledge. So that's mainly what I'm looking at. That's what my focus entails. And so there's other things we can talk about, but that's what I'm laser focused on, is those things.
Taylor goes on to say, no matter which way you go, though, I think someone who is an incompatibilist might say, we don't have free will if determinism is true. And someone who says they are a compatibilist might say, we do have free will if determinism is true. And it could be the case that they mean different things by free will.
Amen to that. Taylor's exactly right. People often mean different things when they use the same words. So it's essential to really try to understand what one means by that before one tries to debate or discuss these issues or to destroy their position. They have to know what they mean by that. And, I've spent a lot of time in the last few years in Salt Lake City and in Utah in general, having conversations with Mormons. And, this is, Mormons and Christians, they refer to themselves as Christians, but, for the sake of conversation right now, Mormons and Christians, we typically have the exact same vocabulary, and we use the exact same words, but we often mean different things by these words. And so you have to always say, what do you mean by that? Almost after every sentence is uttered, definitely after every paragraph. So anyway, conversations between libertarians and compatibilists are quite similar. Now, Taylor and Matt do a fantastic job of this by always allowing their guests to define their terms. They always ask their guests, what do you mean by freedom? Or what do you mean by free will? And, so with these definitions in mind, it's vital to note that one can be a libertarian and also affirm the thesis of compatibilism. All right, now hang with me. All right, so what I'm saying is merely affirming the possibility of the thesis does nothing to commit one to the actuality of determinism across the board, or so it seems to me. And moreover, on the other side of the coin, there are also incompatibilists who believe that freedom and or moral responsibility, and that and or clause is vital. All right, there's incompatibilists who believe that freedom and or moral responsibility are not compatible with something or someone else, causally determining everything about humanity, but who also think that everything about humanity is causally determined by something or someone else. So I'm thinking of Dirk Pereboom, right? He comes to mind. He's an incompatibilist when it comes to desert responsibility, but he thinks that determinism is probably true because of the laws and events of nature. So my particular view is nuanced. So for the sake of argument and to advance the conversation into new territory, which really seems to make a few folks angry, I grant the idea that freedom, at least defined in a certain way, could be compatible with determinism. So, in a sense, I guess I could be referred to as a compatibilist, as long as freedom is understood in a certain way. But be that as it may, like Dirk Pereboom, I'm an incompatibilist when it comes to desert responsibility. So that is to say that rational and moral responsibility in a desert sense are not compatible with exhaustive causal determinism, especially exhaustive divine determinism, but I'll just say exhaustive causal determinism of any kind. So I think Pereboom and I would agree on that, but Pereboom and I would just say, unlike Pereboom, I would reject exhaustive determinism and argue that humans actually do possess limited libertarian freedom and are also rationally and morally responsible in a desert sense. Now, with that said, I might be wrong about this, so don't set this in stone or anything like that, But I think that when I read Pereboom, and I don't claim to be an expert on all things Pereboom, but when I read him so far, it kind of seems like he assumes that he is rationally responsible in a desert sense. Maybe he said otherwise, but so I'm not willing to die on that hill. But just let me add that I've really enjoyed his work on incompatibilism. I agree with him that responsibility in a desert sense is not compatible with exhaustive determinism. And since we are responsible, since we are rationally responsible, at least, that's reason to think that exhaustive determinism is false. He might disagree with me, but to illustrate my point, consider the following about Agent P. All right, so Perry the Platypus of Phineas and Ferb fame, right? Agent P. All right, so if Agent P is causally determined by something or someone else when Agent P chooses, thinks, evaluates, judges, or acts, then when Agent P chooses, thinks, evaluates, judges, or acts, if Agent P does so freely, then that's in a compatibilistic sense.
Right. It must be in the compatibilistic sense because, libertarianism would say if we're causally determined, we're not free.
Exactly. So, however, if Agent P is not causally determined by something or someone else when Agent P chooses, thinks, evaluates, judges, or acts, then at minimum, when Agent P chooses, thinks, evaluates, judges, or acts, Agent P does so freely in the libertarian sense. Now, I refer to this as sourcehood libertarian freedom, since Agent P is not causally determined by something or someone else.
Right. And I don't think the compatibilist would agree with you, because it seems like what we're talking about in this situation is whether or not sourcehood is a necessary condition of responsibility. And so, to the sourcehood libertarian, being the ultimate source of one's own actions is necessary for one to be responsible. But for the sourcehood compatibilist, it's not.
Right.
And so, in your example, if Agent P is not causally determined by something, the compatibilist would say they're still free in the compatibilistic sense. It's just that whether or not they had sourcehood didn't matter.
Okay, so notice what I'm specifically pointing out, though. I'm not saying anything about desert responsibility, at least right now. As for now, I'm merely pointing out that if one is not causally determined by something or someone else when they choose or when they think or when they evaluate or judge or when they act, then at minimum, they seem to be the source of these things. And I contend this is libertarian freedom, even if there is no ability to do otherwise, given the existence of a counterfactual intervener or something like that. Does that make sense?
Well, I guess so. So in your example, Agent P is the ultimate source for his own actions if determinism's false, right?
Is the ultimate source of his actions if
determinism is false.
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. Yet the compatibilist, the sourcehood compatibilist, would say this doesn't automatically provide us with sourcehood libertarianism, because one can be the ultimate source of one's own actions and still be responsible in a compatibilistic sense, because the important question in the compatibilist and compatibilist debate is determinism difference making to responsibility? So to the sourcehood compatibilist, since determinism, whether it's true or false, we'll say, so if determinism's true, we're not the ultimate source. Sourcehood compatibilist would say, doesn't matter, we're still free. If determinism is false, we are the ultimate source. Sourcehood compatibilist would say, doesn't matter, we're still free. That question is not important to the question of responsibility. Whereas the sourcehood libertarian would say, no, it's that sourcehood that is fundamental to whether or not we are truly free.
Okay, so maybe you're referring to Frankfurt style cases. And if that's the case, then the compatibilist can agree or disagree. But I guess here's what I'm saying, and I argue for this as well, is that on the compatibilistic view, where a person could be free and or responsible, again, focus on the and or, right? So a person could be free and or responsible without an ability or opportunity to actually do otherwise and pull it off, right? So the agent is still a non-causally determined thinker and actor if the agent freely chooses to think and act as the what's called the counterfactual intervening observer wants them to think and act. And I contend that if the counterfactual interveners' hands are off, so to speak, if their hands are off, then the agent who could not actually pull it off and do otherwise is still free in the libertarian sense. The agent's libertarian freedom and responsibility is only violated when the counterfactual observing intervener in these Frankfurt cases becomes an actual intervener. So Frankfurt style cases still seem to presuppose and assume not merely sourcehood libertarian freedom, but it seems to me that they also assume the PAP, the principle of alternative possibilities, when it comes to thinkings and tryings. And even though they offer instances of the PAP being false when it comes to the actual pulling the otherwise off, if you will, actually physically doing otherwise. But Frankfurt cases assume the agent has the opportunity and ability to think or try to do otherwise. And this is obvious given the existence of the counterfactual intervener. So if the agent thinks or tries to do otherwise, the counterfactual intervener will step in to ensure that the agent cannot actually pull it off and do otherwise. And I got to tell you, at the moment that we're recording this, there's been 2 episodes of Loki, of the Loki series on Disney Plus. And I think this Loki series so far, in these first 2 episodes anyway, is providing a fantastic illustration of just what seems to be one giant Frankfurt scenario. But you're going to see, if you watch this, you see that there's still instances of libertarian freedom in how Loki thinks. There's times when he's not causally determined by anything else. He's still free, but as long as he acts and thinks and acts, I guess I should say, in the manner that the timekeepers approve of, then they don't step in. He's free. But when he freely chooses to think and act differently, then they step in and they don't let it happen. I guess I should have prefaced that with spoiler alert.
I was gonna say,
sorry. All right. But yeah, I mean, there's instances. There's another couple instances, even the first episode, where this seemed to be the case, where the time agents or whatever they're called would use that little time rewinder thingy in the TVA. I think what is that? The Time Variant Authority or something like that. And while they're in their building, they would use this. But anyway, the counterfactual intervener, this timekeeper agent thing or person, became the actual intervener. But even when you have the bigger picture in mind here, when Loki is talking to Owen Wilson's character, the dialogue went like this. We'll have to see if we can get this into the video, but if not, I'll just try to do it here. Loki says, if the TVA truly oversees all of time, why have I never heard of you until now? And Owen Wilson says, well, because you've never needed to. You've always lived within your set path. And Loki is like, I live within whatever path I choose. And Owen says, well, sure you do. So this seems to imply that Loki has always freely chosen to live within the boundaries of what the counterfactual intervener or the interveners have set. Loki was not causally determined to live within the path he chose at that point. Thus, the timekeepers or the counterfactual interveners have only needed to observe. They've never needed to step in until now. And this is why Loki is responsible for all of his actions until now. He wasn't causally determined by something or someone else. He freely, in a libertarian sense, made those choices. It was hands off. But now the counterfactual interveners, the timekeepers, have become the actual interveners. They're not just counterfactual interveners. Now they're the actual interveners. And since Loki has now apparently freely chosen to live in opposition to his set path, now the timekeepers will intervene to ensure that he cannot do otherwise, even though Loki freely thought and tried to do otherwise. So you've got the freedom in a libertarian sense to think otherwise, even if you don't have the freedom in the libertarian sense to actually pull it off and do otherwise. Now, it's going to be interesting to see how all this plays out. But as for now, this seems to illustrate what I've been attempting to communicate for quite some time. But anyway, it seems to me that I've been able to demonstrate why determinism is difference making, especially if it's exhaustive determinism or exhaustive divine determinism. It is difference making when it comes to desert responsibility. Not only have I demonstrated this, Dirk Pereboom has done so. But if Loki is not causally determined by the timekeepers, but the timekeepers make sure he cannot do otherwise, then Loki can and should be held responsible for his non-caused and libertarianly free actions, even though he cannot actually do otherwise. He can't pull it off and do otherwise. Now, if he tried to do otherwise and the counterfactual interveners become the actual interveners, then Loki should not be held responsible for his actions, at least in a desert sense, because the timekeepers are responsible for what actually occurred if they step in. So, I don't know. Are you tracking with me?
I think I do. I think I realized what you're trying to say in the middle of it. And
Cool.
so when it comes to these definitions, I think what happens is you rightfully, I would say, believe that incompatibilism is true. And so when you say they're free in a libertarian sense without determinism, you're not assuming, because you do argue for it, but you're assuming you have already argued for incompatibilism. And so you're correct in saying if they're not causally determined, it must be free in a libertarian sense because incompatibilism is true. So I think that's the confusion.
Yeah, it might be. And again, I hope to clarify some of this later here in these videos. I'm definitely an incompatibilist when it comes to desert responsibility.
Right. Yep. Well, Tim, I think with that, we should probably cut it off there. And then if you're interested in this conversation, or even if you're not, you should come join us again next week when we continue discussing these issues of definitions and free will and determinism and compatibilism and incompatibilism and all that other good free will stuff. You are free to do so. All right. See you guys.
See you.